So here we are on the 4th of July, 2022. Everyone hear me okay? Good. So I thought about this when, because it is the 4th of July and because this country was founded on the basis of search for freedom for people, and freedom of religion and freedom from tyranny. And some people would say that these freedoms are in question right now. But part of it depends on how one defines freedom. There's a lot of different ways. So I want to hear, as we go through this time together this evening, I want to hear how you interpret that, the idea of freedom. When I asked myself that question, I really had to think about it quite a bit, and I still don't have the solid answer. So I'm hoping we can ferret it out some. But I began looking just in preparation to give this talk, and I found that back in 2006, the Inquiring Mind did a whole issue on freedom, and I didn't read all the articles, so they were really interesting, and I want to go back and read them all. But there were a couple that I drew a lot of information and I thought wisdom from, and they were both actually more or less written by Santikaro, but he also is in one of the articles talking about, he's quoting or translating something from Buddhadasa. So I'm going to talk about some of these things. The first thing I'll read to you is actually by Nina Wise, and she was concluding an article that she wrote about freedom and when things are difficult in one's life. And she says, freedom is about the willingness to feel deeply. Freedom is about the willingness to fall apart. Freedom is about holding on to nothing. And at the heart of that letting go, that disillusion, that surrender, you discover something sublime and unspeakably, heartbreakingly raw. Call it love, call it compassion, call it kindness, call it redemption. And those elements, I think, are very, very important in our understanding of what freedom really is and what it compiles. I guess you might call it responsible freedom. There was another article I read that described a billboard and somewhere in the country, and the billboard had the word freedom superimposed upon stars and stripes, and then there was the words freedom, and the author said, you know, if we're free, I wonder why we must work so hard to convince ourselves and the rest of the world that we are the country of freedom. And it's almost like, you know, this word freedom that we grab onto and clutch. In the very clutching, we we destroy it, or we can destroy it. And as I said, this country was founded on the search for freedom from religion and from tyranny. And it's interesting because Buddhism is also based on freedom. You know, what is it that we're practicing? We're practicing to be free. And so, and the country is about freedom, and yet they don't quite fit together. So freedom has different meanings to different people and different ways to interpret it. We've all spent the last few years kind of bantering that word around different people. You know, is it freedom? Are we free to not wear a mask or wear a mask? Are we free to go where we want? Is it wrong to be asked to keep distance from each other with COVID? And are we free to all carry guns and on the streets, or is there any limitation on freedom, I guess, is what we're being asked to look at. So in America, it's kind of this cultural myth that we're founded on freedom. I mean, we live out here and certainly in our area, in Placer County, Nevada County, that area, those areas are Wild West areas. This was a place where the idea of freedom had got interpreted a lot of different ways, and definitely wasn't freedom for everyone, or isn't still. So American Buddhism has also confronted in the whole of Buddhist tradition some issues around freedom related to sexism and in the monastic traditions. And there's been a lot of other add-ins that have come into question from the Asian cultures that don't fit or don't work well with Western values. And at the same time, our own cultural beliefs, such as the ways in which we as a country or we as a culture define and defend and perceive freedom is not in line necessarily with the Buddhist ideas of freedom. So kind of going to go through some of the, and I'm going to talk about a little bit about this mostly from the Buddhist perspective, and then I want to open it up and have us talk about it just in general, because I'm not going to answer any big questions here. So so some of the kinds of freedom that we're talking about that kind of come into conflict between these two different cultural interpretations. One is freedom from pain, from discomfort. We see it in the American culture, modern culture, as an inconvenience. And there's this expectation that we should be happy all the time, that we should have permanent, unchanging happiness. And we don't consider that there is a confusion between for example, healthy sadness over the, I would say, this is my personal opinion, crumbling state of our democracy and the misuse of resources in our world today and in our country. So there's a healthy sadness around that, but we confuse that with depression. So somehow it's not we get this feeling or message or sense that it's not okay to feel the sadness. And if we're attached to this goal of constant pleasantness, we'll find ourselves struggling against the realities of life, which we have to experience deeply. We have to experience them fully. Just as we, on the other hand, need to experience the beauties deeply and fully of life and love and all of it in order to be whole. We have to be able to hold all of it. And if we make a limit, or we feel like we have to have we can't experience anything that's not pleasant, we're shutting down part of our life, our experience, the energies, all that's going to happen no matter what we do. So rather than just medicating away every single thing that's unpleasant in the ways that life bites us, I thought that was a Buddhadasa expression about life biting us. We have to recognize that the Buddha shows us how to recognize the sources and the ways we're bringing suffering upon ourselves. And when we do that, when we can see what we're doing to not necessarily initiate the pain, because it's going to come, but the ways that we feed it and the ways that we attach to it. And when we see that, then we have the choice, the option to work towards and follow the path to freedom. And the Buddha offered us, as we'll talk about in a little bit here, a lot of different ways to find true freedom. And then there is the freedom from material wants. I don't care who we are in this culture. Almost all of us, especially people who are practicing and part of our communities, we have so much wealth, so much stuff. Even those of us who know and care about the price that we're being paid for the health and the sustainability of our planet by our affluence. We have these habits that come from our insecurity. They come from our fear. And so that freedom that we're seeking gets obscured and gets diminished by our fear and that insecurity. This isn't because we're bad people or because we intend to do anything wrong. It's part of it's instinctual, and it's what we know. But we have to look at this. We have to look at it closely to see, especially right now, because the division between, partly because the division has become so stark and so wide between have and have not, and also because we're running out of time as a culture and as a world to really take a look and write things. And then there's the freedom from limitations. That's the one that's one of the ones that's causing lots of trouble in our culture today. Believing that we as individuals have the right to whatever we believe without any consideration. So for the consideration to ourselves and to our communities. So in doing so, I mean, you can, and this is my opinion, but I see it clearly in the gun control and lack of gun control. opposition. It's this idea that I should be able to do whatever I want, and anything that imposes on that freedom, in terms of guns or in terms of how we treat each other, or in terms of, you can probably think of a whole list of other things, that we've lost the ability to take responsibility and to compromise and to set boundaries. And we do all of that in the name of freedom, but that's really not what freedom's about. And then there's freedom from conditioning. So there's more than one kind of conditioning. So there are the conditions of life, and what the Buddha came to understand, what these conditions were, they changed the course of his life. So when he realized everyone is subject to birth, to aging, to ill health, to death, that there's no one is going to escape that, it changed the whole course of his life. So these are the truths that we can't avoid, and we have to, our task, our challenge, the practice is to learn to abide with them. They are part of the life force, the life, the way it works. And then there are other kinds of conditioning, some of which we're born with as well. We're born with these survival instincts that that bring us this kind of vigilance and hunger and and procreation instincts. In my household, this few days ago, Friday, my sister, who lives downstairs from us, brought home a new puppy. And that puppy is like the total expression of these instincts, you know. He's the funniest thing, and he wants to eat, he's checking things out. He doesn't have a lot of fear now. He's just kind of seeing if and if something is too hot, he moves away from it, and the procreation will come soon. But he's this living example of what we all are born with. And what the Buddha taught, that is, if we don't understand sort of the sources of these conditions and the way they operate for us today, and the limitations that we need to make on them, they lead to craving, they lead to clinging, they lead to hatred, fear and anger, and they lead to delusion and confusion. And this is where the Buddha talks about where we can work with them and alleviate our own personal suffering through the ways in which they overwhelm us and take charge, the way they bite us is so through mindfulness and compassion and discernment, through following the Eightfold Path, we can live with these, understanding that these things will arise. We do get hungry, and we do get angry, and we do feel fear sometimes. But understanding that these are natural processes and that we do not need to be controlled by them changes everything. So there's other kinds of freedoms that get confused. For example, the freedoms, some people advocate, well, they're free from any responsibility, from any commitment. They can do whatever they want and be free from the consequences of it. And that's just, that's an example of kind of a boundaryless freedom idea that in a culture, in a society, or even as an individual, won't work. We won't survive if we do that. And us definitely as a community, we won't survive. And then there's the freedom that to do whatever it takes to preserve our self-esteem. That's an interesting one. So this idea of self that again arises out of this conditioning in our life, but we get identified, we have this sense of self. You all know this one, we've talked about it lots of different ways. It leads to, or can lead to, and to all of us, to some extent, it leads to a kind of self-centeredness, that everything happens in the guise of me and mine, my house, my possessions, my family, my way of seeing things in the world. And equanimity, which I think is the state that probably most closely resembles true freedom, requires that we get out of the middle, that we don't clutch and see everything through how it affects us, or how we're seen or felt enjoyed or liked. So we have to broaden and open our hearts and minds to residing in the now. It's just a part of the ever-changing energy of life. That's really what we are. We're a manifestation of the other ever-changing energy of life. And even we change all the time. I mean, I'm not the same person I was 10 years ago, 20 years ago, not the same person I'll be tomorrow, or maybe an hour from now. You know, we're just this manifestation. And when we can really, truly understand that, experience that, and let that be, and be comfortable with that, then we're free. Then we're free to be in the flow of life. Buddhadasa said that freedom is coolness. We're very cool if we're free. Said that, you know, life bites its owner. And he said there's a kind of a knowledge that leads to clinging, and a kind of knowledge that doesn't lead to clinging. And at the deepest level, knowledge that is true wisdom tells us that there is not such a thing as even good or evil. They're just illusions. There's not even such a thing as birth or death. It's all transformation. And these understandings really lead to the abandonment of clinging, because there's nothing to cling to. If we think that there's something we can cling to, we're bound to be disappointed, and we're bound to feel the pain of that. So seeing that there's nothing to cling to, we're just in this. We can't try to possess life because there's nothing to possess. It's always going to be here. I heard sort of off, a little bit off the subject, but I heard this in a talk I heard the other night that, let me see if I can remember how it goes. Oh, there was a talk that Suzuki Roshi gave many years ago when he was asked about whether whether you're working in, he said, if someone's working in the garden and there's earwigs and you don't want to, and you don't want the earwigs to eat your plants, is it okay to squish the earwigs? And he said, well, you're not going to kill life when you squish the earwig, because you can never really kill life. It's all about transformation. All the molecules, all the things that are that were part of that manifestation as an earwig go back into the earth and create something else. And it's the same with all life. And all life is really Buddha nature in a way. This is what he said. He said, but be careful, because you don't want to kill the Buddha nature in yourself. So I thought that was a really interesting, it's almost like a koan, but this idea that all the things that we do that kill that Buddha nature in ourselves, all the things, if we kill with hatred or intention to do harm, then we're destroying our own pathway to happiness and freedom. So he said, don't try to possess life. He said, nirvana is the word we use to translate as enlightenment. He didn't say this, I'm saying this. Really means the extinction of the fires of greed, hatred, and delusion. So, so we want to cool the jets. We want to let go, cool our fires through this practice of calmness, of openness, of being with what is. So I'm about to open this up. I'm just going to tell you a few words when I started contemplating what is freedom. These are the words that came up for me: choice, karma, compassion, kindness, wisdom. Discernment, I think, is a really important one. Mindfulness, morality, inclusion, and interdependence. So let's take a few minutes to talk about it. I'd love to hear your ideas about what freedom is. And there's just a few of us, so you can just unmute yourself and speak.
Maeve, I was reminded when you first started talking, I haven't finished the book, but there's a book out called Bittersweet. Bittersweet, and it's basically it's exactly what you were beginning to talk about, the American cult of happiness and the need to be happiness. And it's for a lay reader, but I mean, she does bring in research, and she mentions Sharon Salzberg and some of her teachings. But it's a very she's the same one that wrote the book a few years ago called Quiet, and how introverts have power even in a world that can't stop talking. It's kind of the same idea that we need to kind of go against the grain of the culture we're living in, and experience and embrace the fullness of life, which means well, her word is bittersweet, and that I've thought of it often because it does sum up so
It
many.
does.
Right. And there's a lot of aspects of, when I think of freedom, much of it is bittersweet. I mean, there's a kind of a loss and a gain. So
Yeah, 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 yeah. And I think about, one way to describe our practice is it's against the stream.
yeah.
So, the same thing. Thank you. What other ideas about freedom?
In the vein of when life bites us, one of my
Yes.
favorite quotes about freedom is from the philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre. He said, "Liberté is what we do with what happens to us."
Uh-huh. Yeah. Yeah. Karma is the result of our actions. So that word discernment again comes in. I just think there's a lot of things going on, questions about, this whole thing about right to life or right to choice. And the two things that I think need to be included in any discussion of that is compassion and discernment, wisdom, discernment. Because we, just as the freedom isn't this blanket statement that no matter what you want, everybody should be able to do it, whatever they want, whenever they want to do it, with no consideration for the consequences for anybody. That's the idea that we practice discernment and wisdom and compassion. Feels to me like that kindness puts us on the path to making healthy, holistic decisions.
Maeve, this is Marcia. I was thinking about the kind of the words that you were using to describe freedom, like choice, wisdom, compassion, discernment, interdependence. And where I kind of went into a negative was, it's like, well, what is it that isn't freedom? And words came up like, what's not freedom for me is expectations, projections, speculations, proliferation of mental proliferations. So things that seem to be like there's something out here instead of what's in here. So it's like when I think about freedom, it's like wanting things to arrange a certain way in the external.
Uh-huh.
Kind of in a stylistic kind of way of thinking about freedom, pushing away the unpleasant, experiencing the pleasant, whatever that means. It's all kind of external.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it's really interesting to kind of turn the mind back on itself into kind of just an awareness of what it is that's happening. And then just see what happens.
Yeah.
Because those kind of things that I've been conditioned to want to happen in a certain kind of way, my life, my livelihood, my, me, it's like, it's all about the lack of freedom.
Yeah. 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 And the whole, when you say those words, I think about how the idea that the world is supposed to work a certain way, that I am supposed to get certain benefits or whatever it is. And that if it doesn't work that way, that's an impingement on my freedom. That's what you're saying in a sense. It's that feeling that, wait a minute, I have this idea, I have the right to whatever I want. And if it's not going that way, then there's something wrong.
Right. That's exactly right. And what's that, that song that, God's on my side, that line of,
Yeah.
it's like you have this righteousness
Uh-huh.
just in our lives. Whereas if you travel to other countries, it's very different oftentimes, the cultures that are more collective and more about the community as a whole. We're so fierce about our independence and believing that we have this right to things being a certain way. It's really that conditioning that's hard to get over.
Yeah, when you say that, I think about it's something I heard about a child. Some of you may have heard it. It was on one of the podcasts or on NPR or something, about this boy who was like 11 years old, and he's playing basketball, and every time he would shoot a really good shot, he would go like this, like God was on his side. And his father asked him about it, and he said, well, he said, so do you really believe God is on your side? And he said, well, no, because there's too many people, and he would be, how could he be on everybody's side, and how could he know when I made a basket, and it was that, but that expectation somehow that in some ways we do get that thing that, we deserve whatever we want.
Hi, Maeve, it's Cindy.
Hi,
Thank you so
Cindy.
much for this talk. It's very thought-provoking, so I appreciate the topic of freedom. And when you said freedom, like Marcia, I kind of thought the opposite. And one of the words that came to mind was enslaved as being the opposite. And then right away, kind of the whole idea of samsara came to mind. And, as opposed to liberation, and then liberation being more freedom, but used in the Buddhist sense. And also thinking about like what we're conditioned to think of as freedom has to do with things like the American dream and pleasure seeking. So, what can I do to seek pleasure? And we work and we work and we work, to get married, have a couple kids, a white picket fence, the roses, the dog, all that kind of stuff. And then we go through it. And then lo and behold, we figure out, wow, I've just been enslaved by all of that, actually. And start to turn things around and start to really search for inner freedom. And what can I do to liberate myself from all this suffering? And one of the things that has really, kind of been a catalyst for me is thinking about the whole idea of subduing the mind, because it's really my monkey mind and my negative mind and the afflictions that are enslaving me, and all of us really, right? And then you realize that we're all kind of, that's the human condition, and that's the condition of samsara. So what can we do to liberate ourselves from that? And then start chipping away at it slowly by cultivating virtue and positivity and figuring out what that is. Like you said, ethics, for example, starting there and realizing, oh, gee, it seems so easy, but our culture is so rebellious and so individualistic, like Marcia was talking about, that we don't realize that that's actually a roadmap to happiness until we start trying it on. And then we realize slowly, we gradually get a little bit more freedom of our mind, within, and realize that that's really where it's at, right? Because the happiness isn't out there, the happiness is inside. And that's why we were jumping from, ice cream to Mexico to, TV or whatever we thought would bring us pleasure in the moment. But in the end, we're always coming back to ourselves, with the root of it being our self-cherishing attitude and being the ignorance that we have about the way that we actually exist. And when we can start like letting go and loosening that up and start, getting some control over our mind, rather than our mind controlling us all the time, and figuring out ways to cultivate that, and things that we need to kind of abandon or let go of, and things that we need to cultivate, and figuring out what those things are, then we at least for myself, gradually feel a little more freedom in terms of the mind, actually, my mind, because that's where I find happiness, is within myself. Even if I'm in a difficult situation or if I'm sick, I have the choice as to how I'm going to think about that. And another thing is, like, we can tell when we're helping other people, or when we're helping others or we're benefiting others, that makes us feel really good, right? And then and why? Because we're not thinking about ourselves.
Yeah.
So when we don't think about ourselves, we actually feel a lot better. And so that's just an example of what we can do to promote our own happiness, as opposed to chasing after pleasure. So I really kind of, separate those two, in terms of the pleasure being sort of those outer things that we strive for, and happiness, which to me relates more to my heart mind than things.
Yeah.
So that's kind of my take on it at this point.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, the life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness kind of sets us on this course that somehow it's out there. You have to pursue something. We have to keep trying to find it, and then we find something. We get a new car, or we get to have a good meal or something, and we think, oh, that was good. That made me happy. So I guess I need more of that, because it didn't last. And rather than the experience of happiness, the setting us in the course of noticing, paying attention, as you're saying, through mindfulness of the internal experience, and the ethical part. Tony Bernard says that he thinks that and this is true of many the Asian Buddhist practices. The first thing you do is the ethical part, and the ethical part naturally leads you to mindfulness and to happiness. So it's kind of like you can come in from different angles, but what you said is very appropriate.
Thank you, Maeve.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else want to weigh in here on your ideas on this or feelings about it?
What I'm grateful for is that right now, our version of freedom does not mean just plain physical survival. I think of how many people are starving, all the refugees we have in various parts of Europe and Africa and other places, massive floods in Australia. Right now, we have the freedom to live. That's pretty basic.
Yep, it certainly is. And something to be very grateful for. I'm old, I'm 82, and I'm grateful for every moment that I'm alive, because it's a gift.
I have to agree. That was a great talk, Maeve. And even though we don't have all the freedom we want with some recent things that have changed, we just have to look at the positive, that we have,
Yeah.
we're not a refugee, or we're not homeless, or,
Mhm.
have all those other things that many people don't have in other countries. And just try and do the best we can with what's happening in our own country.
Yes, yes, indeed. And unmute yourself, Ellen.
This is more anecdotal, but at the beginning of the pandemic, and it just relates to what you're talking about. At the beginning of the pandemic, we were just learning about masks and how our masks protected, and those masks at that time protected other people more than they protected us, or at least that's what they were telling us. And I was in the pharmacy line, and it was winter. I mean, it was winter. It's still kind of wintry, and people had colds and things, but people were pretty much separating. And then they kind of filtered out and they left, and it was my turn to go get ready to go up to the pharmacy counter. And a woman came in sort of right up behind me, about a foot behind me, young woman. And I kind of panicked, I'm in my 70s. And I turned and said, well, could you step back? I mean, we need to be separated. We need to be 6 feet apart, or whatever it was. And she turned and she started in on me about her freedom and how her liberties were. That was the buzzword at the time, and my liberty and I didn't know where this came from in me. I didn't know where it came from in me. As I whipped around to her and I said, I think it's more like freeloading, and we're having this fight and about freedom. What's freedom? I said, are you free to give me the infection and all these other people here that are wearing their masks? And she's yelling at me, you're telling me I can't, stand where I want to stand. And I don't know if any conclusions to that other than I was just really surprised at how quickly I turned on her, and how strongly because the emotions of the time, but and how I thought afterwards, I thought, well, the dilemma of freedom, isn't it? We all have the freedom.
We can all fly the freedom flag and then have our own way of interpreting that, and that's a problem. That's a problem, and I don't have the answer. I mean, I think
I don't either. I think it's just something you have to work out, and Buddhism is the most helpful thing for me. It's so. Today I thought I marched and we're working the parade with I'm with the Democrats, and I had made a commitment to go. I didn't really want to go, and I thought on the way, before I was getting ready, I thought, well, what if somebody takes pot shots at us, out of nowhere? I had never thought this, and now we live like this, right? And I thought, what if this happens? And I just kept on going. So now you get your keys, you put your shoes on, and you get out the door, and of course nothing happened, and then I started to feel foolish, and then this afternoon that happened in a parade in Chicago. I know. But does this mean we stop? Does this mean that does this limit my freedom? I don't know. These are such good questions.
It's really something to think about. And I think I'm going to read you this little piece here I have sitting in front of me, so I'll read it to you. To love in the face of fear is bold. To love in the face of hatred is courageous. To make the choice to stretch through resistance to love even more deeply and widely in the face of blatant acts of fear and hatred is a heroism of the heart that may be our only hope to heal this world.
Yeah.
Where's that from, Maeve?
Christy Nelson is the author of that little piece. I'll read you a poem too that I have on the same page, and before we do our metta. The Unbroken. There is a brokenness out of which comes the unbroken, a shatteredness out of which blooms the unshatterable. There is a sorrow beyond all grief which leads to joy, and a fragility out of whose depths emerges strength. There is a hollow space too vast for words, through which we pass with each loss, out of whose darkness we are sanctioned into being. There is a cry deeper than all sound, whose serrated edges cut the heart as we break open to the place inside, which is unbreakable and whole, while learning to sing. As we break open into the place inside, which is unbreakable and whole, while learning to sing. And that's Rashini Ria. So anything else before we do, announcements. I'm going to let Jen do announcements, right?
We usually do those after the metta.
Oh, after the meta, okay,
Yeah.
the meta and then the
And then-
announcement.
Yeah.
Okay.
you.
Yeah.
Okay, so just taking a moment here on this day of exploration of freedom to let ourselves feel both the confusion and the sadness and the happiness and the gratitude, all of it. There's room for all of it. And we just need to open our hearts, relax, and allow ourselves to feel it all. That's wholeness. So we send ourselves these message, may I live with an open heart and an open mind. May whatever covers or blocks my heart or my mind be dissolved, so that through open-heartedness and open-mindedness, I may experience true happiness. May I feel strong and healthy in mind and body. May I have peace and ease and safety in my life. May I be safe and protected from inner and outer harm. And may I awaken and be free. And we just let these wishes grow in all directions, out into our friends and families and neighbors and the creatures we share the earth and the air and the water with, out across this whole nation and all across continents and around till it covers, these wishes cover the whole earth, wishing that all the beings on this earth may live with open hearts and open minds, that we may all feel strong and healthy, and that we may all have peace and ease and the things we need, and that we may all be safe and protected from both inner and outer harm, and that we may all awaken and be free from suffering. And then we send these wishes out into the universe and beyond, to all beings everywhere, those that are known and unknown, seen and unseen, born and to be born. May all beings everywhere be happy, be at peace, and be free. And if there's any benefit we have accrued through our practice here this evening, may we dedicate that benefit to the well-being and awakening of all beings everywhere.